Hi everyone, welcome to Think Smart Home. It's very annoying when you are quickly trying to access a local service in your home lab and you don't remember the IP address or the port number. We are going to fix this today. I'll show you how we can access a locally hosted service without needing to remember the IP address or the port number, and that will be with a valid SSL certificate. We will be using a locally hosted DNS server, Pi-hole in this case, and a reverse proxy service which will be Nginx Proxy Manager. We will be using Nginx Proxy Manager to obtain a valid wildcard SSL certificate using Cloudflare, and that will be without opening any ports on a router by using a simple DNS challenge. Alright, so what do we need? We need a domain name hosted on a Cloudflare definitely, a Pi-hole on an LXC container, and finally an Nginx Proxy Manager again on LXC container. I'm using LXC containers in this case because they're super lightweight, and most importantly, we will not have any port conflict issues because both the LXC containers will have their own fixed IP addresses. Alright, so we already installed Pi-hole using an LXC container template which we created in the last video. I'll leave the link to that video down in the description below if you want to watch it. Alright, as I mentioned earlier, we need to install Nginx Proxy Manager on an LXC container. So first we need to go to our Proxmox and create a new container. We will be using the template as I mentioned earlier, which we created in a previous video. So I'll clone this template and I'll give it a template ID. Maybe I'll just follow my Pi-hole, so I'll give it and call it npm. I'll make it a full clone and then click on clone. Alright, LXC container is created, so we need to just start it. Let's start the container. Alright, so now we need to log into our LXC container. So username and password we created as per our previous video when we were setting up the template or when we were setting up the LXC container. So I log in using the same username and password. Alright, so now we are ready. We can install Docker onto our container. So to install Docker, I'll go to Docker website and then copy this URL, go back to my Proxmox and then paste it there. And then the second command, alright, so Docker is installed. If you go back and check, the Docker Compose is also installed. So now we are good to go to install Nginx Proxy Manager on a new LXC container. So to install Nginx Proxy Manager, we'll be using Docker Compose. So I'll close this one. I'll go to Nginx Proxy Manager website and then get started, and then we'll do the full setup. So if I'll scroll down, here you can see there's a big Docker Compose file. So we just simply copy the whole file and then paste it into our LXC container and then run it from there. But let's quickly go through it. So basically it will set up an app definitely, which is the Nginx Proxy Manager, and then there will be a database setup using the MariaDB. So this is the database setup, and then so these are the environment connections between the app and the database. So you can change the MySQL passwords if you want to give it a strong password, but make sure they match on both cases so that there are no issues logging in. So Alright, so we'll just copy the whole Docker Compose file and go back to our Proxmox. Before we paste it, definitely we need to create a Docker Compose file. So before we do that, I would rather create a folder Docker, and then there's a folder already in Docker, so I'll just simply go into that folder and then create another folder for Nginx Proxy Manager, just to keep things a bit cleaned up in here. So alright, so now here we can create a Docker Compose file. So I'll use Nano editor, you can use whichever you want. Alright, so now here we need to paste the Docker Compose code which we copied from Nginx Proxy Manager website. So we don't need to change anything in here unless you specifically want to change the port numbers, or if you want to add or maybe give it a strong password. So for this tutorial, I'll leave everything as default. Control X to save it, and then yes. Alright, so Docker Compose file is saved. Now we need to run the Docker Compose. So let's start the Docker Compose up-d. Alright, so now it's pulling up the Nginx Proxy Manager and the database from the server. So this might take a while. While this is happening, please give this video a thumbs up and consider subscribing to my channel. Also, hit the bell icon to get notified every time I release a new video about smart home automation, storage, and network security. Alright, so installation is complete. Now we need to note a couple of things here. So if I go back to the Docker Compose file here, I should have mentioned this one earlier, but so here you need to note down the admin web port. So we will be accessing Nginx Proxy Manager using this port. Alright, so first we need to find out the IP address. So I need to run this command, and now here you can see the IP address for my Nginx Proxy Manager is 192.168.10.202. So to access this one, I just need to copy this one, paste it, and then the port 81. So if you have done everything correctly until this point, you should be able to see the login page. Now the default username and password is again mentioned on their website. So these are the default admin users. So I just will copy the admin, and the password is again change me. This is mentioned on their website. Alright, so it's first time we're logging in, so we'll just set up the name and then the admin user. So for this tutorial, I'll just set up a temporary user. Alright, and I'll save it, and then I need to set up the password. So default password is change me. The new password so make sure you give it a strong password, even though we are not going to expose it to the internet, but still it is recommended to give all your locally hosted services a strong password as well. So I'll just save it. Alright, we are in. So here the first step is to get a wildcard SSL certificate from Cloudflare. So to do so, click on SSL certificate and then click on add certificates. So here we need to enter the domain name. That domain name must be hosted on Cloudflare. I've already added that domain to the Cloudflare service. If you haven't added your domain and your domain is not pointed to the Cloudflare, just click on add domain and then just enter your domain name and then just follow the steps in here. It's very easy, and it might take few minutes to get your domain pointed towards the Cloudflare server. Once that's done, then click on your profile and then go to API tokens. Here we need to create a new token. So I'll click new token and then use a template to edit DNS zones. The first sign is good enough. I'll leave the zones, then the DNS and the edit, and then in the include I will select specific zone and select the domain which I want to use, and then click continue to summary. And then here it will give you a summary and then click create token. Okay, so it has given me a token. I'll just copy this token. Don't share this token with anyone because this is a kind of access of your domain which is hosted on Cloudflare. So go back to your Nginx Proxy Manager. Here you need to enter your domain name, or basically it will be a wildcard certificate, so we need to start with the static and then the domain name, and I'll say use DNS challenge, and here I will select the provider, that's Cloudflare, and for API token remove everything after that equal sign and then paste your token in here. So once you have done that, then check agree to the terms and then click save. The domain name, so it does funny things. So once you enter a domain name you have to hit enter, otherwise that whole text will go away. So I'll do that again. Okay, so now domain name has been entered in there, so now it's good. Just click on save. It might take a while to validate that this domain belongs to you, and then it will go ahead and then get a wildcard certificate from Let's Encrypt. Alright, so as you can see we have a valid wildcard certificate from Cloudflare and using Let's Encrypt. So it is telling you the expiry date for that certificate as well. Don't worry about it, it will be automatically renewed by Nginx Proxy Manager, so we don't need to worry about the renewal. Alright, so now we need to go ahead and start adding the hosts. Basically we will be using subdomains. So now we need some kind of a locally hosted DNS server to point that subdomain to this specific IP address, for example in Nginx Proxy Manager in this case. So as I mentioned earlier, that DNS server will be Pi-hole. So we installed Pi-hole in a previous video. So this is currently my production Pi-hole and then the Proxy Manager. So I'll close both of them just to avoid any confusion. So you need to take a note of this. So this is the container name for our Nginx Proxy Manager. We will be using this inside Nginx Proxy Manager to access our Nginx Proxy Manager instance. So I'll explain this one a bit later when we go back to Nginx Proxy Manager to set up the hosts. Alright, so this is the Pi-hole installation which we set up in our previous video. So I need to know the IP address of our Pi-hole installation. So this is the IP address. Now we need to access Pi-hole first and start adding the DNS zones in there before we can use them in Nginx Proxy Manager. So as you can see, Pi-hole always shows you the placeholder page. So to access Pi-hole admin page we need to add /admin. So this was the Pi-hole installation which we did in our previous videos. So let's start adding some DNS records. So the first one will be the DNS records for our Nginx Proxy Manager, because that's where Pi-hole will be directing all our traffic or all our subdomains to. So I will copy this IP address, which is the Nginx Proxy Manager IP address, and then paste it into the IP address and then give it some name. I'll say my and the domain name. So make sure you use the same domain name which we use in Nginx Proxy Manager to validate and get the SSL certificate for. So I have got this one, so I'll just copy this one just to make sure I don't have to type it again and again. So I'll add it. So now we have added a record in there. So now we don't need to add multiple records. So for next record, let's say we will be using this one to access Nginx Proxy Manager. But let's say if you want to access our Pi-hole container or Pi-hole installation, then we can simply add the CNAME record. So what that record will do, it will simply point everything to this this domain or this subdomain. So in future, let's say if you have to change the IP address, we don't need to go back to each and every instance to change the IP address. We can simply delete this one and then add it again with the updated IP address using the same domain name, and it should be replicated, or it should be updated for all the records. So let's add a new CNAME for Pi-hole. I say my Pi-hole, and then the domain name, and then here we'll be using the domain name for Nginx Proxy Manager which we created earlier. So my npm, I'll add it. Alright, so now what this domain name or subdomain should do is should point me to this IP address, which is the IP address for my Nginx Proxy Manager. So ideally it should redirect me to my Nginx Proxy Manager, but it will not in this case. This is because my PC currently does not know that this Pi-hole installation is my DNS server. So there are two ways to do it. Either we update this IP address as the main DNS server in a router, or the other way is you go to each and every client device and update in there. So I'll use the second method in this case just to show in this tutorial. I'll update that IP address in my laptop. So I'll do that now. I'll quickly open my network properties and then we'll go back and update the DNS server. So my Pi-hole IP address is 10.236, so I will put it in there. The alternative, I can simply leave it to my router again. So that's done. Now I need to renew my IP lease, so I can do that by so this command will renew my IP lease. So let's verify my DNS server. As you can see, my DNS server is now updated and it is the Pi-hole installation, which currently is 10.236. So now if I try to access this domain, it should work. Alright, so now you can see that I can access my Nginx Proxy Manager. To access the admin portal, again we need to use the port 81 as mentioned on their website, or as per the installation which we discussed earlier. Right, so alright, so we are in. So now as you can see, now we don't need to remember the IP address, but still the part of the problem is still there, that we need to remember the port number. Now let's fix this. The first step is to add our first proxy host. So we will try that with the Nginx Proxy Manager. So click on add proxy host, and here we will be using the same domain name which we added in our Pi-hole. So I'll simply copy this one because I want to use this domain to access my Nginx Proxy Manager. This is the IP address of Nginx Proxy Manager. So I'll go back, I'll enter the domain name or the subdomain and then hit enter. Alright, so here for the scheme we'll use HTTP because it's not using SSL certificate. For the host name or the IP address, we will be using the container name in here. So as I mentioned previously, so we will be using npm-app-1. So that was the one which we got after the installation of our Nginx Proxy Manager. For the port, again as usual, it will be 81, and then we'll go to SSL Certificate and then select the one which we added, and then I'll select force SSL and then HTTP2 support as well. Click save. So now let's test it. Alright, so we can access a Nginx Proxy Manager using the secure connection and without any port number. So that's the first one. It's a success. So we can simply log in using this same admin and username. Alright, so see, we are in again. So we can now even close this one. We don't want to use the IP address. We can see one host, which is the Nginx Proxy Manager. Now let's add a Pi-hole in there. So to add Pi-hole, we need to use this IP address. So, and the domain name which we added in there. So for Pi-hole, we use myph. So I'll copy myph in there and then go back, click on add proxy host, and then enter the domain name. For the IP address, I'll go back to Pi-hole, copy the IP address for the Pi-hole, and then go back here, paste the IP address, remove all the HTTPs, and then port 80, and then again for the SSL certificate, we'll select the same one which we created. Okay, now we have our Pi-hole instance. So if you click on this one, again it will take us to the Pi-hole default or the placeholder page. So to access Pi-hole, we can add admin at the end, I mentioned earlier, but this will be kind of annoying to type in the subdomain and then type the admin or /admin or /admin again to access the Pi-hole interface. So now we can fix it. We can go back to our Nginx Proxy Manager and then edit the host for the Pi-hole, and in advanced we can simply add a redirect. So I have added a redirect which will redirect the original URL to / or the /admins. Alright, so now if we save it and then click on the Pi-hole container again, as you can see, now we can access the admin portal from there. Alright, so we have added two services in our Nginx Proxy Manager. One is the Pi-hole and the other one is Nginx Proxy Manager itself. So now you can add as many services as you want, but I'll quickly want to show you something because it's not sometimes very straightforward to add all the services, because sometimes if you're trying to add IP addresses, you might have to add or enable other options. So I'll take you to my production Nginx Proxy Manager installation. I'll show you something over there. So the first one is Home Assistant. It's a little bit tricky. So if I click on my Home Assistant installation, it will, as you can see, it's working and it's all locally hosted. If you call this URL on your browser right now, you won't be able to access it because this is only accessible when someone is connected to my local Wi-Fi or local network. So what I wanted to show is, see, some services you need to enable few different options. For example, for Home Assistant, you have to enable WebSocket support, otherwise it won't work. And then that's not the only thing you need to set up. So this is the IP address. Again, this is the default port for Home Assistant. That's fine. But other than WebSocket port and the SSL certificate, you need to set up one more thing. If you go to the configuration for your Home Assistant, you need to make sure that you have added the IP address of your Nginx Proxy Manager into the trusted proxies in there. If you want to do that, it won't work. You'll have a bad gateway error every time you're trying to access your home assistant through Nginx Proxy Manager. So that's one thing for home assistant, and it's same for Proxmox. If you're trying to access Proxmox, you need to enable the WebSocket support for the Proxmox. Everything else is the same, because since by default Proxmox is trying to access self-signed certificate, so you need to select the HTTPS in scheme and then the IP address and the default port, and then same goes for the SSL settings. Okay, the next one I want to show is the Synology NAS. So Synology NAS is quite straightforward. So just need to access your IP address and the port number, and I think you should be good to go, as long as you haven't enabled the checkbox to force into HTTPS connection every time. If you have done that, that means you have to change it to HTTPS and then use the port number, which is the HTTPS port, not the HTTP port. Alright, so the other one is that the last one is basically the my Dream Machine Pro. So I had some issues with this one, so I had to enable both WebSocket and block common exploits in there to to access the Dream Machine Pro portal. So again, you might know, if you have Dream Machine Pro or Dream Machine, you might know that it always goes to HTTPS port. It tries to use the self-signed certificate. So that's why for scheme you always have to access or use HTTPS, and then the IP address and then the port number, which is by default the 443, and then enable these two options, and then the SSL again the same, and then you should be able to access your Dream Machine. Then same goes for Proxmox. As you can see, I can access my Proxmox and my home system is working fine as well. So in this way you can add as many services as you want, and you don't have to remember the port number, the IP address, and also it is with a valid SSL certificate. So that's good. I think that's it for this tutorial. I believe I have covered everything. Let me know down in the comments below if you're trying to make it work for some services and it's not working, and then probably you will have a look at those services and try to troubleshoot what issues you are facing. But I think that's it for this video from me for this week. Please give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing to my channel. I'll see you in the next video.